Hello everyone! Today I wanted to talk about something that, while not necessarily being a problem, is something that irritates me to no end. Defense skills. You see, the issue I have with them is that they aren't even the most defensive tool any identity has. 9 times out of 10, you're better off just using your regular skills to clash with the enemy and negate their attack entirely. And if the enemy is using a skill that rolls too high, popping an ego will always be the best action. Your regular skills in ego are hundreds of times more defensive than defense skills, which I find to be absolutely ridiculous. 90% of the time, if you can't clash, it's because it's against a powerful skill like no trespassing on K-Corp, which, if it hits, you just get staggered and die, even if you use a defense skill. The only way to stop that is to either clash with an ego or redirect into a tank ID that's actually resistant to it. Defense skills are the single most situational mechanic in the entire game because they only ever do anything against attacks you're already resistant to, at which point, who really cares if you get hit? Against attacks that you are 2 to 4 times weak against with 3+ coins, aka the only time you'd actually want to use a defense skill, they do literally nothing. Counters? You get staggered before you can use it. Guards? Great, you negated 20 of the 150 damage you're taking. Still staggered. Evade? Nice, you avoided the first coin. Too bad it can roll up to a 26. Any attack that isn't like that you can easily tank or clash against without a defense skill, so what's the point? Not to mention the fact that they overwrite your bottom skill, meaning that if it was your skill 3, you now need to wait upwards of 10 turns to get it back. So how would I go about fixing them? There's no real clear and easy solution to truly make them perfect, as no matter what you do, clashing will and always will be superior, since dealing damage while also negating it is always better than simply negating it. I'd still like to at least see defense skills be usable, and perhaps under the right circumstances, even a preferable option. Perhaps the simplest and easiest fix is to the overwriting of skills. This is also an issue that plagues egos, so it would be nice to see it implemented. Essentially, what I would do is instead of overwriting the skill, it is instead put back into the skill rotation, so you can just draw it again. Of course, it could still take around 5 turns to get it back, but it's much preferable to the current 10. The first defense skill I want to talk about in depth is the most basic of the 3, the guard skill. It's very straightforward, as whatever it rolls, you will gain that much shield, which acts as a bit of extra health. The main issue with guard skills is that the number they roll is usually not very high, ranging from around 10 at worst to 20 at best. It's a pitiful amount of shield where, unless you're taking a hit from a damage type you already resist, you'll only be negating around a quarter of the damage, which, unless you're a tank ID specifically, will most likely stagger you. I would fix this by doing 2 things. First, make the number bigger. The amount of shield you get is so negligible it's practically useless, especially for the identities with lower rolls. Probably no more than 30 though, as any higher may end up making it actually impossible for you to take any damage. And the second thing I'd change is that no matter what your identity's resistances are, if you are taking shield damage, it will always be neutral. Simply put, this means that whether you are taking a hit from something you are weak or resistant to, it will always act as if you are not. Technically, this would make it worse against damage types you resist, but if you think about it, there's no reason you should need a defense skill to tank an attack like that in the first place. Moving on to the next skill, we have evades, the one that could actually be considered defensive. Most evades roll 14, though there are a few exceptions which roll lower and higher, but generally, any attack that rolls lower than 14 against an evade will be negated. Evades are the one skill I have the least amount of issues with, as it is in a pretty good spot. However, there is still a flaw. Now this flaw is one that also applies to guards, so I would change this about them too. but whenever you take a one-sided attack, even if you used a defense skill, it won't activate. Now normally I wouldn't have an issue with this, as it would simply be how they worked, but they only work like this in human fights. In focused encounters, this isn't a problem since you can just target the fastest slot and dodge everything. But in human fights, you are forced to always target the slowest person, meaning even though you should be able to dodge everything, you can't. There is a simple solution, however. All you have to do is make it so that defense skills activate against the first one-sided attack you receive, even for enemies. This would have the added benefit of making certain bosses harder by having it so that you can't just simply ignore their defense skills. And that just leaves one: counters. Counters, counters, counters. The worst of the three by far, and the one that you'd be hard-pressed to even call a defense skill. Whenever you take damage, you deal damage back. How the actual fuck is that defensive? The one and only scenario where it could even remotely be considered one is when the enemy that's attacking you has 2 skill slots and you can stagger him before he can use the second one. Realistically speaking, I can only see one way to fix counters without slapping a ton of protection on them, and that is to allow counters to clash. I don't have a single clue as to why they prevented counters from doing so. In Library of Ruina, they worked exactly like that, clashing against one-sided attacks, which made them actually defensive. But in Limbus, they're just pure damage? What's the point? Counters could legitimately be the best defensive skill in the entire game if they just function like they did in Library, but instead they just waste away in the shadow of evades. All defensive skills could very easily become incredibly useful and unique if they were just given even the slightest of tweaks. I don't know if Project Moon will ever change defense skills, as they've yet to make any significant changes to any status effect, but one can dream. Anyways, that's basically it. I just wanted to rant about defense skills for a while, as I just can't help but feel that they are such a wasted opportunity. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Feel free to tell me what you think about my ideas, whether they're terrible and would break the game, or if you think they would make it better. And if you have any ideas of your own, I'd love to hear them. Goodbye.